Welcome to Markings. I'm your host, Ken Allen, and Markings is a program that looks at faith issues, personalities, and ministries in our community that we hope are of interest to the community of faith and to all of really our viewers. Our topic today is racism, but not just racism. What is the Christian response to racism? What does it mean that racism is prevalent, it's active, and what does that mean for us as Christians in terms of our thoughts, in terms of our response? And to help us explore this issue is my guest, who is no stranger to this program, who's been on many times, and it's good to have you here today, sir, Dr. Rudy Siebert, who's a professor of religion and society at Western Michigan University. Well, racism is very much in the news this day, particularly with some of the things that have been going on over at Western and in our society, and then we're revisiting the whole business of affirmative action and all these kinds of things. So where do we want to get started in this, Rudy? Do we want to talk about what racism is or what?
Well, I'm first of all very happy that we can have this little discourse about this. And maybe we start, with the incidents which took place on our campus in fall semester and in the winter semester. I think we wouldn't be here and would not have this discourse if these incidences would not have taken place. So it was a rather unfortunate event in one of our classes, a very large class, 200 students. And there was a situation in which the professor used rather harsh language toward one of our black students. I think it was originally not a racist affair as such. No. It just happened that the student, the co-ed, was African American, and the teacher was white. And so it is not entirely clear to me why all this could not have been settled. It was a few-minute affair, really. Could not have been settled on a more informal level, and why the professor could not apologize that he lost his cool. We are all...
and maybe that would have ended it, or that would have been it. Not ended it, but settled that particular
Hopefully.
problem.
I mean, we are all fallible and make mistakes, and sometimes we are tired and so on. But it went too fast to a formal level and has reached, in the meantime, the federal level even. So now, of course, the question is why such a little incident then can go through 2 semesters and a protest of students, black students, marching into the same professor's classroom a semester later, and the students not appearing when they were called in by the administration, so that then finally the administration had to go beyond the campus and beyond the state even, and so on. So this is, the starting point, and we should ask ourselves how such a little match somehow can create such a fire. Obviously, there must have been some restlessness for quite some time, so that a little match falling into the powder cake then
ignites
can
the thing and makes it explode.
Exactly.
Yeah. What if you were defining racism? What would you say it is? Is it simply one group of people lording it over another, or having an attitude about the other people as being inferior, unwanted, or what?
I mean, there is an anthropology of race, of course, and we have to ask the social sciences before we can ask what the faith community can do about it. I think we should ask, anthropology and so on. And the human species is divided up into those racial groups along continental lines. So there's nothing ontological about race. It is a historical affair. And as it came about historically, it could disappear historically again. Now racism and race, or the knowledge of race, let's see, the African race, Asian race, the Caucasian race, European and Near Eastern, Malaysian race, the Native Americans and so on. Now there are, of course, lots of studies, and this has nothing to do with racism. I think racism comes about when one race tries to maintain itself, to preserve itself for the price of another race. So Hitler, for instance, wrote very clearly in My Struggle that the Slavic race had to pay the price for German self-preservation and so on. So in that sense, then myths are created, with the intent to exploit and to instrumentalize and to enslave and to kill and so on, sometimes with a religious element. Hitler talked a lot about providence, which had brought about the evolution of races. And So the racism begins when one race, then, as you said, feels superior because of his achievements, or the Aryan race created electricity and cars and so on. And then one deducts out of this superiority that one has the right to use the others, or even to annihilate the others, in terms of what Hitler called the aristocratic law of nature. Like the lion is more powerful than the lamb, and therefore the lion as a predator has the right to eat the lamb, so the more powerful race has the right to enslave the other. And Hitler went so far that when the Germans showed to be too weak in terms of the Slavic armies, that he thought, well, that was the same law and it served the Germans right. Maybe the British could have done better, and so on. So it is this aristocratic law of nature, which is the exact opposite of the messianic law, according to which the lion eats straw, lays down, but eats straw. It's a rather perverse line in a certain sense, in that sense that the vision breaks with this everybody eating everybody in nature. This is the messianic vision. And in a certain sense, the racists go beyond, below the threshold of the prophets of Israel and the Christian prophets and the Islamic prophets, of course.
So is it, one thing it is to recognize variety in God's creation, but what induces, it seems to me that part of racism is fear, right? Fear of maybe being overwhelmed by the others or superseded by the others, or...
Definitely. I mean, in Hitler's case, why, does everybody talk about Hitler now again and says he was a tragic case, and he was a heroic person and so on? Because the European race feels that the other races, let's see, over 1 billion Chinese, the Asian race, the African race and so on, that they multiply faster and that they will be squeezed out in a certain sense, right? So all the right-wing extremism and so on, which you can study in Europe.
So it kind of comes out of that self-preservation mode.
So we are constructed in such a way that we are not only afraid of what is now, but also of that what could be in the future. And so a certain preventive activity, so that they will not, the Asians and the Africans and so on, will not do this to us, what we have done to them.
Well, I think, don't we sense this in this country now in America? Because what traditionally has been equated with being American is being white Anglo-Saxon, something, or white Caucasian. Now, of course, we're seeing a lot of African-American people. We're seeing a lot of Spanish-American people, Latin people, and we're seeing the infusion of a lot of Asian people, which sets us up for if certain segments of the society are scared or thinking about sets you up then for racism.
Racist backlash and so on.
Right.
And I think that the young woman, the young black woman, that we can understand, her indignation about the belittlement by the professor, has to be seen, of course, not only in the context of our university, but in the wider context of our society. It is a society which reproduces itself competitively, antagonistically, in conflict terms. And some minorities, racial minorities, find themselves always on the wrong side of the track and so on. Now, when this young woman now perceives this belittlement in the context of such a society, and knowing, more or less, maybe instinctively knowing that our hate crimes have already gone up to 500 and we are only in April now, that there is an extreme right-wing extremism. We have a fascist party in Nebraska, which is spreading all over Europe. The leader is now held in Denmark and to be delivered to Germany and so on. But we have even in Congress, that means in mainstream, in last week, when the welfare thing was discussed, one used the example of alligators, the other one used the example of wolves. That means the poor people are like alligators in captivity. They unlearn to be predatory and to find their own food. So it is the case with the poor people in this country. Another woman, a woman representative, talked about wolves which are in a cage, and after some time when we want to let them go out, they don't go anymore, and so on. This is, of course, all social Darwinistic language. It's fascist language.
Sure.
So when this young woman sees this and the affirmative action threatened and so on, or the school luncheons threatened and so on, then there is an atmosphere in which then such belittlement, weighs much more than if the whole situation was peaceful and so on. Yeah.
Exactly.
And so when you take, in addition to this, that the university, being a rather weak link in the liberal democratic society, but it promises for many people a certain upward mobility, and it is exactly there where this, where our black people, for instance, could break through class caste,
and find the acceptance
upward mobility,
as persons,
and acceptance, and it happens exactly in this medium, you see, where she is now belittled. Then we know why the match, suddenly blows up the powder cake. And of course, the president, Dieter Hennecke and so on, says rightly, we have done so much. What else can we do? And we have Black Americana studies. We have affirmative action still. We have a high percentage of administrators and faculty, belonging to different races and so on. But maybe it is, and I think from our point of view, it is enough because we have all done this. But maybe enough only on the surface. And maybe we have to penetrate into the depth of the society, which is an exchange society, which is not very often not equivalent. The exchange is not equivalent. It is antagonistic in itself. In this antagonism, some racial groups always find themselves on the wrong side of the track.
So maybe, even for the situation in the university, the healing somehow, or if there's to be reconciliation or healing or understanding, maybe that's got to come from someplace else. Or maybe it has to build more out there in the society as opposed to the university finding, particular ways and means to deal with that problem.
The university has to do what it can do, but I think the university has done a lot of things. But then when we talk with this depth dimension, where we have an antagonistically reproducing society, that goes far beyond the scope, of university, or that, because we have it everywhere else too, than what we can do. So there is the principle of subsidiarity. See, we should do what we can do, but then some things we simply cannot do. And that is the reason why the president asked for federal help.
Well, it's only been, a few years, over 100 years, that we had the Civil War in this country, and that prior to that and during that, we had the establishment of slavery. And look what we did to a whole group of people whom we brought over here in terms of robbing them of their personhood, of their sense of value, and we're still trying to deal with that, I think.
And this is particularly amazing since we thought we were a Christian society, so we were bound to the golden rule, and we did all the time to other races, which we don't want other races to do to us, right?
How does it? How does Christianity, and any other religion for that, sometimes land on the side of supporting a kind of a racism? Is it to misread one's faith or religion, or are there parts or are there components in the religion itself that would support exclusiveness instead of inclusiveness?
Well, I mean, let's take a concrete example, the beautiful letter of St. Paul to Philemon about the slave Onesimus, the useful one, and so on. Well, I mean, Paul, sends him back. He does send him back. But he sends him back with emphasizing that what was called brotherly love and which we call solidarity today. And with this letter, somehow, Paul undermines the slaveholder master-slave relationship, right? So, in a certain sense, the letter is done in a very loving way, but he makes very clear to the slaveholder that when he sends Onesimus back, that Onesimus is not any longer his slave, but that he is his brother, and that solidarity takes place. Now, we don't know if Onesimus was of another race than Philemon and so on, but I mean, this definitely could have been applied in our society if people had remembered the letter or the Sermon on the Mount or whatever.
We look at ancient Israel, for example, and I don't know if you would call that racism, but look at its exclusiveness in terms of the way it saw itself and its mission and its viewpoint to the Gentile world around it. you know, you can pick up strands of racism, if you want to call it there, or separatism there. And I think while Israel of old had that exclusive kind of exclusiveness in terms of what they could do and what they couldn't do and who they were, I think it was primarily to remind them about who they were themselves and their mission, as opposed to set them off against their surrounding neighbors, and so that they would, you know, instead of them ostracizing their neighbors and looking askance at the Gentile world.
Yeah. But we have to be careful, you know, that we don't project certain concepts which we have, you know, into the past history, because that what we call race today, you know, has something to do with the 19th century, with Darwinism, you know, and the evolution and so on. At that time, one talked more in religious language. You know, these were other tribes and so on, and they were not the chosen ones, and so on and so on. And so it was the whole thing of idolatry. The others had the wrong gods, and therefore you could attack them, and so on and so on. Yeah. So the race concept, as we use it today, is relatively new. Yeah. The attack against the Jews was very often a religious one in Spain and everywhere. Christ killers, the you know, the God killers, and so on. But Hitler did not have this religious connotation anymore, right? It was something biological now. That means there was a parasitic type of a race which went into the Aryan bloodstream and therefore was you know, poisoning it, and so on.
And therefore to be eliminated.
By euthanasia, because they considered, you know, the third phase of the Jewish question to be euthanasia. Dr. Dworkin, you know, it was a medical problem.
That's racism gone to extreme, obviously. You know, we have the kind of racism, don't we, in this country that says. That I think that may say to a white person, hey, I'm a little more superior than a black or an Asiatic or a Latin American. And look at it in terms of my job, my wealth, and so forth. I must be a little better blessed or favored by God. And therefore I can kind of look down my nose, or I prefer not to deal with these people, or prefer just to ignore them, that they're kind of a subculture. And not a group of people that have particular rights as I do, and not a group of people that would bring enrichment and good things to the culture. I think you have that out there.
The question is how this is psychologically and sociologically possible, you see. I mean, if we have Christian faith communities and, you know, the norms, the values go through the superego or the conscience of people into their behavior, why does that not work, you see? That is the question. I mean, the Archbishop of Baltimore had slaves, you know. The Earth Alliance had slaves. They sold them, you know, and so on. How is it possible, you know, that Christians could get involved in this? And I think the reason is that they did not emphasize the universalistic elements, which are in Judaism already.
Oh, yes.
And which are in Christianity.
We see it in Southern Christ ministry and in the early church.
Yeah, but let's go to you know, you are right, that there we have denominations and sects here which emphasize the Old Testament very much. And there you can obviously find some motivation, you know, for this racism and so on. But also
the Old universalism, I meant.
Yeah, the universalism.
Strands of universalism.
So what we call monogenetic, the idea, you know, that all human people come from one pair and so on. Well, that is what Israel shares with the Islamic people and with Christians and so on. But in the 18th century, of course, that was shot at, you know. Instead of monogenesis, then polygenesis. That means that we come from different pairs in Africa and so on. But it is this, you know, this natural science discovery which makes the modern racism possible, because then the modern racist says, see, we come from different parents, we come from, you know, real human beings, the others come from half apes or half human beings. They have no reason, since they have no reason, they have no rights, and look, they look even similar and so on. So it is this perversion of a natural science question, you know, an enlightenment question in a certain sense, is then used by the racists to say they are not so human as we are, they come from another pair in Africa than we are, and so on. And then from that deduct the right that they then can be used like animals in the fields and can be exploited, and so on. So why? See, this is a question it's a question of conscience which we must ask ourselves, since we are members of a faith community, how this could happen to us, you know, when the Christians still think in terms of monogenesis to a large extent. You know, some advanced theologians think in different ways. but it is still taught, that we come all from one pair,
Sure,
and so on,
sure.
right? Or if we go to the other side, the eschatological side, the just of all nations, of all races, will go to Jerusalem. So you have another universalistic element,
Right, right.
So how is it possible that this universalism can be blocked by all these racial and national type of, particularization?
Well, I think,
So-
you can answer very simplistically and talk about self-interest and greed and turn inwardness and maybe a fear that leads a person to say, hey, this is my survival. So if one goes into a survival mode, then the threat to the survival is no longer a person or someone to be cared for or listened to or respected, but it becomes a thing to be gotten rid of or overcome or eliminated or whatever the case is. And I think this is what Hitler did when he looked and saw some of this. But what I'm concerned for, and I'm sure you are too, is how can we as a nation somehow struggle with this and overcome this business of racism. And certainly, secondly, then the other question is, what do we really have to do in our faith communities to work against, what seems to be kind of a thing that's coming back again, this.
Yeah, it is.
And we see these crazies, I call them crazies, making their appeal to people and picking up followers that are extremely racist,
So let me formulate it that way. A society rests in a certain sense on three pillars. One is money, one is power, and the other one is solidarity. The question is, can we, now, besides the religious issues, can we as a nation muster sufficient solidarity? Now, we do have it sometimes. If we have a flood, if we have an earthquake and so on, people come out of their houses, and sometimes it doesn't even matter which race or whatever, they help each other,
Yes,
right?
they do.
But unfortunately, as soon as the system is restored again, 3 days later or whatever, everybody goes back into his houses and all solidarity is gone. That shows us two things. A, that we also have this solidarity, which could embrace other national people, other races, and so on and so on. Secondly, that somehow a system which reproduces itself antagonistically through the separation and the alienation of groups and so on, that this system gets in the way. So as soon as the system works again, the solidarity is gone. We are then autonomous people, but we have no solidarity any longer.
Solidarity.
Yeah,
No,
right.
no.
So the question would be, how is it, could we, without religion now, would it be possible for us to muster sufficient solidarity? I'm not talking about money, we need power, right? But can we get the third pillar moving, right, in our country? This is decisive. We don't have any health insurance because we have no solidarity.
In the midst of diversity, can we do that? Because
Yes,
we
right.
need to recognize the diversity.
That's right.
And maybe people aren't recognizing the
think-
diversity or giving it its due.
Yeah. And I think it is a matter of life and death for our society. On the other side, in Eastern Europe, where I go so very often, these people
look what's
did
happening
have,
there.
Yeah, but these people had solidarity, but they didn't have any autonomy. And at a certain point, the leaders didn't know where to go anymore. The people didn't want to follow anymore, and they withdrew recognition from and legitimation from their leadership. Now, in our case, the opposite may be true. That means we do have a lot of autonomy and sovereignty of the individualism.
Yes,
and
we do.
But we don't have normally enough solidarity.
No, we don't.
And it could be that Johnson is right. When he said a few years ago was right. Some morning we will wake up and we will not know our country any longer, right? Because of this lack of solidarity, masses of people may withdraw their allegiance from the political system, the economic system,
sure.
and so on. And then we may, you cannot keep a country together by security forces alone.
No.
And not by money alone, and not by power alone.
No.
You need
Solidarity.
solidarity at the same time.
You need a base.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And from here one can go into the religious realm. It depends, of course, some people say religion is obsolete, religion has come to its end. I would say maybe Christianity has not even started, you know. I mean, we are 4, 5, 6 million years, you know, on this globe. Compared to this, you know, 2,000 years is a rather short time.
Right.
So if somebody says, you know, Christianity has come to its end, I said, how can anything come to its end which hasn't even started? By the way, I would say the same thing with socialism, which has a much shorter, shorter time.
Christianity.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, how can my friend in Europe, one of my good journalist friends said, you know, how can they say socialism has broken down when it has never existed, and so on. So, but as far as Christianity is concerned, I am among those who would rather say it hasn't even started.
So you're optimistic.
Yes,
I'm
optimistic. And I think that there is a potential. Now, of course, we didn't speak in the faith community about solidarity.
No.
Solidarity is an invention, you know, by the labor movement. And they translated what we find in Leviticus, you must love your neighbor, or the fifth commandment of the Sermon on the Mount,
yes.
You must love your neighbor, and so on. That was secularized into solidarity.
I see.
And the same thing happened, you know, with the issue of exploitation, you know, like exploitation of black people and so on. Christianity introduced into world history the liquidation of exploitation, you know. But that's the truth of Christianity. The untruth of Christianity is that it remained entirely religious, you see, that it was not translated into economic or sociological or what concept. And when Marx did this, you know, in economic concepts, the Christians couldn't recognize themselves in this type of a language. So the question is, you know, as a secular society, it is thinkable that because of humanistic elements, we could muster enough solidarity, not only when we have
an emergency, or a need,
or a flood, or whatever, but more as a part of our everyday life world, you know. Could we muster this? Simply because we all are human, we all must die, we all have to suffer, and so on, so that no government like in Eastern Europe would have to tell us, you must be solidary, but that we are solidary with each other because we know we all must die, and so on. And some of us die even earlier than others. So the life expectancy of a white man in Detroit is 78, of a black man is about 45, and so on. But nevertheless, however long it lasts, you see, out of our finitude, we could develop solidarity for each other.
We could.
I mean, it doesn't even have to be particularly religious.
No, that's true.
But the question is now, if it is true, you know, that Christianity hasn't even started and that it has a chance, then we would have to ask, can Christianity do once more even better than what it did in the late Roman Empire? It brought some warmth, you know, into the icy cold structures of the late Roman Empire. Could Christianity do that once more?
Personhood, dignity, cut across classes. Yeah, it did.
Like Paul would say, I do not know any difference between Jew and Greek anymore, and so on. Yeah. Or even between the genders.
That's right.
See.
That's right.
And the real translation of love your neighbor is really love your neighbor. He is you. He is the same as you. That is the original translation.
Well, you love. Yeah, that's right. You love your neighbor as you love yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, as much as you love yourself.
The old Hebrew thing is he is you, or he is the same as you, and so on.
Yeah.
And that is the religious root of solidarity. Yeah. So what's missing, you know, in the racial question, like in the class question, and so on, is this solidarity thing. And this is the source of all values and norms. Sure. If I am solidary with my wife, I will not cheat her, I will not lie to her, I will not murder her, and so on. So, but if solidarity is missing, we can talk about any ethical values. They just won't be there.
We can't talk much more because we run out of time, unfortunately. But I hope that through the gospel, the gospel can affect some kind of solidarity in terms of understanding and acceptance of others and loving of others. Thank you very much, Professor, Doctor, for being on this program. And on behalf of your local Lutheran church, thank you for watching Markings, and hopefully you will tune in again next week.